This is Digital Marketing Depot, broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webinar producer. Thank you for joining us today for Google's Smart Bidding. It's even more about the data. We are very pleased to welcome Andreas Reiffen, the CEO of Crealytics, as our featured speaker. Now, before I turn the webinar over to Andreas to get us started, I want to tell all of you a couple of things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Q&A box and we will do our best to help you. If you want to learn more about our sponsor, Crealytics, or Digital Marketing Depot, there are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them and they will take you where you want to go. Remember that you can customize your audience console to move or resize any windows that you have open. Now, we are going to hear a lot of great content today, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this broadcast and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email out when it's ready. So with that business taken care of, let me make a more formal introduction. Andreas Reiffen is an entrepreneur, marketing technologist, and expert in data-driven advertising. His company, Crealytics, works exclusively in the retail sector and offers a holistic approach to search, shopping, and paid social campaigns. Andreas is a regular speaker at industry events worldwide and continues to be one of PPC Hero's top 25 most influential PPC experts. You can see a more complete bio and contact information for Andreas on the left side of your audience console. Now remember, if you have questions for our industry expert, please make good use of that Q&A box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Andreas to get us started. Andy, there's your first slide.
Thanks for the introduction, Karen. And I'm really excited to be here. We have a quite large audience, actually, and a very exciting topic, which is everything around tROAS and smart bidding in general. A few words about myself beyond what Karen mentioned. So privately, I'm a big coffee fan. We have a lot of coffee in our office in New York. I actually moved from Berlin to Brooklyn, and in order to blend into the crowd in Williamsburg, I let my beard grow. And when I have time after work, I do a handstand. I would say it's little talent and a lot of ambition, and but I'm getting closer. This being said, we have a lot of content to go through. Let's get right into it. Before I walk you through the agenda and all the points we are going to cover today, let's travel back in time a little bit and recap what happened in our space. So when I started was 2016, we were affiliates at that point of time and doing paid search. So essentially, we bought traffic directly from Google and monetized it through commission deals. And the biggest issue at that point of time was managing millions of keywords and related ad copy. And this was highly complex. Also on the bidding side, to bid on millions of keywords, it's, you deal with data scarcity and lots of problems related to the bidding. And at some point, I think Google realized that this whole thing did not scale as well as it could. People were searching for products in the end. And Google was still showing this text ad to bridge the gap between the search and the product people would see. And it became, Google made a big change then with the launch of Google Shopping, where they just solved the problem in a different way. Instead of just having these text ads in between, they pulled the product into the SERPs. And also they tried to simplify the bidding problem by essentially bidding on the product itself instead of bidding on the queries which match to different products. The big advantage of this was it solved the problem of complexity, because bidding on a few thousand products is much easier than bidding on millions of keywords. At the same time, it took control away. And what advertisers wanted to do is bidding on the query level still, because different types of queries with different levels of intent in these queries have different conversion rates. And if someone searches for shoes, you don't want to bid as high as if someone searches for buy black Adidas Gazelle shoes or something. And the system didn't allow for that, so smart companies came up with segmentations using campaign priorities and kind of hacking the system so that it did what you as an advertiser wanted and to squeeze out a little bit more performance. I remember a conversation I had with someone from Google many years ago, and they already, he had indicated that Google would take a different approach. Instead of making query-level bidding available to advertisers, they would rather try to automate the whole thing, and this is where we are currently. tROAS is quite a big topic. Google is pitching this to many of their clients. And this is why we want to take a deep dive into this and see whether you should use it, when you should use it, and how you could also benefit from it and make it better. So let's take a look at the different sections we're going to cover and summarize everything so that you know what will come in the course of this presentation. So first of all, we found out that tROAS really does a good job in maximizing revenue. So if you are focused on getting the highest possible revenue out of a predefined budget, if this is all you want to do, then I would highly recommend to use tROAS. It's very unlikely that you will find other solutions which are stronger, and also solutions you get at such a low price point, in this case nothing. What we still see is that the target accuracy isn't as great. So it's not really reliable. You can't put a target in tROAS and trust that it will always hit exactly that target. We also found out that while tROAS works pretty well, it tends to over-report on its success and show more revenue than what you would truly probably get. And we're going to go in into some more details to explain how we come to that conclusion. We know that many advertisers, especially the more sophisticated ones, they go beyond just optimizing revenue. It's about new customer acquisition and essentially driving customer lifetime value. And whenever you have these more complex, holistic goals you optimize for, it's difficult to do that with tROAS, mainly due to the lack of audience control. And we see that these more advanced metrics usually lag behind the revenue you can maximize by using it. And we recommend going after smart targets and then just being very agnostic and test tROAS by ingesting your own data. And also using any third-party bidding system or manual approach to see what performs best, and then be quite pragmatic and take what's better for your business. So let's get into the first section and take a look at what tROAS actually does under the hood. We had 3 tests. It's hard to draw some standard baseline. This is why we had multiple different approaches. It was partly third-party bidding systems, it was partly a manual approach, or in-house developed solutions from advertiser side. And of course, the uplifts achieved, it's just symbolic here, because you never know how well this was done before. But let's take a look at the numbers. What we see here is a comparison of revenue always on the left-hand side, you see the traditional approach. So third-party bidding could be manual, could be in-house solution, whatever, versus tROAS on the right-hand side. And in the bubbles underneath these charts, you see the achieved ROAS. So in the traditional approach versus tROAS, and you also see the target which was set. So let's go through that. What's remarkable is that in all three tests, there was a substantial revenue increase. Actually, test 1 as well as test number 3 on the right-hand side show more revenue at a higher ROAS. So there is just no question mark on whether or not this is better. It's clearly showing better performance. You get a better efficiency at a higher revenue level. The case in the middle, test 2, is kind of different because you do get more revenue, but your ROAS goes down heavily from 4.1 to 1.8. So what do these colors of the bubbles underneath it actually mean? So the yellow one, 2.7, is yellow because it's not perfect. Perfect would be we would have achieved the target very accurately, but here we are kind of close, 2.7, 2.2, that's still acceptable and fine. The other one, the one in the middle, we have a target of 2.7, but actually only achieved a 1.8. This does not look good at all. But also on the right-hand side, if we put a target of 12, and we achieve a ROAS of 20, this is nice, and we should all be glad and happy that we saw such a good result, but we would have wanted to get more volume in and rather take the target ROAS of 12 as defined instead of getting a much higher efficiency but keeping volumes down. So let's take a look at the same 3 tests, but clicks, because that's quite interesting. So as you could see on the revenue side, we have in all 3 cases an uplift in revenue. But now take a look at the clicks. It's kind of surprising that in test 1 we had a decline in clicks, as well as test 3 we had tROAS needed less clicks to achieve more revenue. So what we conclude here is that tROAS seems to leave the not so good clicks just on the table, or gives these impressions to other advertisers whether likelihood that the traffic or the clicks will convert is higher. So they tend to focus on clicks which have a high likelihood to convert and don't spend money on clicks which won't convert. In the test here in the middle, test 2, where we saw the result was rather not so good because we got slightly more revenue at a substantial decline in ROAS. In this case, we apparently got significantly more clicks than before. Just wanted to highlight that. What's also interesting, the decline in clicks in test 1 and test 3 doesn't come along with a significantly lower cost per click here. The cost per click, actually, you see this in the bubbles, stays relatively high in all cases. In the second case, where we saw the not so good result, it actually even doubled. I think this is very symbolic for everything tROAS does. Actually, the key thing it does right is balancing all segments with each other. So it means device ROAS. We saw quite a gap in the traditional approach between 14.9 and 10.2 ROAS, whereas tROAS, the span is just much smaller. So what it does, it balances devices pretty well, thereby improving efficiency. So it's a very good budget allocation. You don't want to see one segment with a high return and another one with a very low return. If you balance this, you just get more revenue at the target ROAS. The same it does for locations. In the traditional approach, you have to work with your modifiers and you have to constantly adjust them. tROAS does this automatically, and again, the span is really really tight here. And it's very clear that this is something which is built into tROAS, and we see the same behavior, which is very positive in these cases. Also in another case, which is audiences. What we have shown here on this slide is we have essentially normalized the account average ROAS for the traditional approach to 100%. And then we see on prospecting, so non-RNSA, we have a slightly lower efficiency, while for the best customers, we have a much higher efficiency. So it's actually not really balanced. On the tROAS side, it seems to be way more balanced. So we have only a slightly higher efficiency on the best customers. So the point here is that this is while leveling the different devices and leveling different geolocations, on the audience side, it's rather questionable whether this is actually desired. And advertisers usually would not want to do that. Why? Because the best customers, they are usually the basket abandoners, or someone who has shown major activity on the website and is very inclined to buy. And most large advertisers try to not spend too much, especially on low funnel retargeting. So we kind of don't fully trust the numbers. We know there's less impact than what we see, but the system here is just informed with performance data, which is probably distorted in this case here because it doesn't really reflect incrementality. So this leads to a situation where our best customers are the ones who are already inclined to buy and don't need additional ad exposure, then they're actually really expensive now to reacquire. So we pay a lot for customers which might have bought anyway, and this is why we have question marks around it. We can also see this. What's depicted here is the span of CPCs on a per query level. So what's interesting to see here in these dots at the bottom for new customers, the range is pretty small. So essentially on a per query level, Google would not differentiate the bids too much. But on the existing customers, especially the ones who have visited the website just recently before, we see that this span is much greater. So Google tends to bid very aggressively when the buying propensity of a specific user is high, which might just correlate with the incremental impact we would get out of this. It's underlining what I mentioned on the previous slide. So to summarize, we have devices very well balanced. Geolocations are also very well balanced through tROAS. And so are audiences, with a caveat that on audiences, we actually don't want this to happen. But based on the numbers which are funneled into the system just does what it's supposed to do without necessarily doing the right thing for us as advertisers. Let's take a look at the target accuracy. Two examples here. In the first one, in 9 out of 12 weeks, the target was missed. So you see the dotted line, which is the target, and then you see the actual ROAS achieved. And actually until week 9, nothing had happened. We had raised the target and the ROAS was still relatively low, and only when we really pushed it further to 4, then it started reacting once and it came back to a lower level. So we were not really satisfied and didn't know how to actually manage it because it did something but didn't fully react to what we wanted to see. Totally different in the other case. And there you see the set target and then the 2 blue lines, which is mobile and desktop. And we see that both segments actually are pretty much in line with the target set before. There was one exception, which is the sales day, which you see circled in red here. And let's take a deep dive into this one because it's actually interesting to see what happened on that day. So on the left-hand side, you see the revenue per click on desktop, and you see the cost per click on desktop. And the highlighted area in light blue here is that sales day. So what happened is that the CPC stayed the same. So the system did not react to that because it didn't have time to actually learn, and apparently it was not informed that this day existed and had no expectation what would happen. So as a result, it kept the cost per click stable. However, as people converted like crazy that day, the revenue per click went up substantially. So this resulted in a ROAS peak, which you see in the chart on the right. It actually, the achieved ROAS was then much higher than the target. Is this what we wanted? Not really, because we would have wanted to capture all the volume out there instead of having a higher ROAS and leaving volume on the table. So it's apparent that while AI is working here, AI doesn't know everything. So you need to make sure that whatever you know, which the Google system might not know, that you proactively manage things. So you shouldn't just rely on tROAS capturing these trends. The same would happen if you get whatever shipment of 10,000 new products for a bunch of brands. You can expect that your conversion rate would go up. We wouldn't expect Google to react immediately to such changes. So take your knowledge and lay it on top to make the whole thing smarter. Here we see one case where actually the performance was not as great, and this is the second example that we saw at the beginning. It's a branded campaign we took a look at, and you see that the impression share initially was at 91%, which is already really high. So what tROAS did, and you see this in this blue line here, it started bidding up and higher, and with all these bid increases from 60 cents to 1.2 here, we just gained a little bit of impression share. So what happened here with the ROAS, ROAS decreased from 5.5 to less than 2, which is definitely not a good thing. What struck us here is that apparently the number one thing tROAS is doing is leveling the ROI across all segments. But what we would have expected the system to do, as Google has all the auction data points, is that they know about the S-curve, and they would have known that there is no additional volume available. So bid whatever you want, you just capture bad queries which are not really related anymore, but you won't get the sales in. And it clearly failed here, and I believe it's something they are still working on to avoid this sort of thing. In a manual approach, this would not have happened. Everyone would have seen, okay, 91% impression share, let's not bid too aggressively because we are capturing the majority of the volume already. So to summarize that section, accuracy of target achievement, it's very mixed. It's not consistent. In some instances, it actually worked pretty well. In some others, it didn't work at all. Fast reaction to market environment. If you have seasonal trends, then the system will pick them up. If it's like the national sales day in France, where everyone will buy, and in this case, you need to interfere in the system, and it won't react in that one day. And respecting auction behavior is actually an issue which needs to be solved in order to further make the system better. So why do we believe the system over-reports a little bit on its success? Let's take a look at a few slides we are sharing here. So just to give you some more context, what we see across the board, that there is a correlation between the incremental impact something has and the performance in terms of conversion rate things show. So if you run a campaign on your brand name, let's say you are Macy's and you start bidding on Macy's, it's very likely that you see a massive conversion rate, and it's at the same time also known that what you truly get is nothing, or maybe a percentage, a percent of the sales you would see. So incrementality is very, very low. Everyone who has run retargeting campaigns in display and tested them for incrementality will know that the incremental impact is maybe around 3–4%. But if you see $100 in revenue in your reporting, this means you get 3 or 4, but not that much. Again, conversion rate is massive because we're capturing traffic of people who are inclined to buy anyway, whether they see an ad or not. And within then retargeting RLSA, and this is the box you see on the bottom right side, you still have different audiences and different incrementality factors here. So someone who has seen a product or maybe even put many products into the basket and has done this just right now, leaves the website as being retargeted, is likely to not be very incremental. So we kind of need to find a balance between seeing great KPIs but dealing with low incrementality, or seeing maybe lower efficiency but being confident that we drive incremental sales in the end. So what we see comparing the traditional approach with tROAS is that in the traditional approach, there was a large portion of traffic going into non-RLSA, so prospecting, 45% into prospecting. And then we saw that relatively small amount went into these high buying propensity customers, 27%. So if we now compare this, the split of audiences with tROAS, we see that the prospecting part is much smaller with 28%, while the high buying propensity audiences are quite inflated. And we see this with actually high and medium buying propensity users. So the system tends to generate more traffic, to push more volume with users who are inclined to buy anyway, and this way pulling obviously conversions on its side. If we compare the traditional approach versus tROAS, and what we did here is actually we had, you see on the dark blue bar, existing customers, and on the light blue bar, you see new customers. In the traditional approach, we get or we need 1.9 touch points to close a sale in the end. while tROAS is generating 3.8 touch points here. So this is a huge gap, actually. So in the end, tROAS tends to generate lots of interactions and tries to get as many ads in front of users, which I think from a Google perspective makes total sense, because if someone is inclined to buy, you should show him that product. From a usability perspective, or if you want to be user-friendly, that's exactly what you need to do. However, we as advertisers, we have to pay for these clicks, and we don't necessarily want to overpay if we can get a user coming back and buy from us for free. And this is kind of the trade-off Google is facing, or the different goals an advertiser has versus Google, who needs to look after the user as well. Let's make this a little bit more tangible and transparent. So if the first click was a PLA, someone is clicking on this Nike product here, then this user has several touch points with any other channel, ends up clicking on this Facebook product ad. Then tROAS will generate an additional touch point at a 60% likelihood, whether the traditional approach will only push another ad in at a 33% likelihood. So we can clearly see that it's way more likely that in a last click world, tROAS will get the credits, but also in attribution, the assignment is always a function of the number of touch points again. So the more touch points you generate, the more credits a whole channel tends to earn. And this is the problem here you're going to have with measurability, and you need to make sure you compare apples with apples in the end. So to summarize, we miss active audience management in tROAS, and we don't really like that Google is making these decisions without giving us some more control. Actually, it might limit performance in the end as well. We know that it's hard to compare different approaches due to the fact that we see lots of low funnel clicks in here and have this incrementality question. But the good news is that there are also ways where you can apply whatever measurement system, attribution system, and funnel things you are tracking back into the system. And we're going to show how this actually works at a later point. So let's take a look at what happens if you have a different target than just revenue. And I'm going to give you some history now. In the early days when we started in affiliate marketing, we optimized for a CPO in the end. And the problem with this is if someone is selling socks and laptops, a CPO of 50 is really bad for the socks, but it's great for the laptops. So the order doesn't say a lot. And some guy then came around and said, why don't we relate it to revenue? Then the problem is fixed. But if you sell socks and laptops, your socks will have a margin of, let's say, 70, 75%, and your laptops rather below 10%. So revenue doesn't say much because you have always different margins for different products. And this is why the next step of the evolution was then aim for profit. So instead of tracking revenue and pushing this KPI back into biddable media systems, you would then just take the real profit margin of the orders, which is, the net sales price of each product minus cost of goods sold, and then you have order-related costs, which is shipping and packaging and processing and all that stuff. So you come to an order profitability metric, and this is what people started funneling back. And then the next smartest guy came around and said, yeah, nice, but I don't care that much about nuances in margin only. The biggest deal for us is we have loyal customers, and they will buy many, many times from us. So why should I aim for a profit on the first order if I can make money on the long run? So I would rather favor the same amount of margin from new customers than just from the existing customers, which might have bought anyway from me. So many smart advertisers started factoring in repeat purchases they would expect and had a kind of prediction of the true value coming in, and then they align their customer acquisition costs with their customer lifetime value. And how do you actually do that? If you run your campaigns in a manual way or with third-party bidding, you would implement an account structure where you have a new customer campaign. Technically, you exclude your existing customers from that campaign, so that you force them down into a second campaign where only these existing customers, or mainly these existing customers, would land. And so you have several tracking requirements here. You need to be able to track new customers. What's a new customer? What's an active customer? Ideally, what's a dormant customer? You need to measure your product margins, returns, cancellations, and you need to predict the future margin of repeat purchases. What would result in the bidding then is that you realize that a new customer who buys something has a higher value of than just the first purchase. So the bidding will be informed with more with higher KPIs in the end. So there's more value than just the first purchase. So what it would actually do, it would decrease bids where margins are low, returns are high, or new customer rate is very low. And where you see you drive high margins, low return rates, and you win lots of new customers, the bidding would start bidding high. So essentially under the hood, there's a budget reallocation. You stop overspending on your existing customers, and you better take that money to invest it into new customers, accepting a decreased efficiency on the first purchase, but in expectation of making money over time. So that's a very common strategy. So if we implement the strategy and take a look at the results of tROAS, we see the following. So in the second column, spend share and NC rate, what you see is that the new customer rate generated by tROAS is only 22%. That's the right bar, while in the traditional approach, it's 28%. And then we were running two separate tests, which we can compare against each other here. So the resulting cost per new customer, which is the third column here, you see in one instance, the traditional approach was 46 euros per cost per new customer versus tROAS 68. So big gap. In the second test, we had a $30 cost per new customer versus in the traditional approach versus 43 in the tROAS approach. Again, a huge gap. And if you then compare this from a different angle, taking a look at the long-term ROI, so factoring in expected repeat purchases, you see that there was twice a positive ROI in the traditional approach, while in the tROAS world, in both instances, the return was negative. So what's the reason for this? Is mainly the lack of audience management. So what we did here is we excluded campaigns from the, we excluded existing customers from the new customer campaign, which seems to work quite well, although we can only apply a minus 90% bid modifier, but it works much better than no bid modifier at all, and Google is just polluting both campaigns with existing and new customers. So it's hard to really just mainly go after new customers and invest the budget there. So to summarize, tROAS definitely struggles with new customer acquisition, but the good thing is you can actually follow that approach, funnel your right KPIs into the system and test whatever other bidding system you want to use, and also see what happens over time if Google makes progress and fixes this so that the results become better. Let's go into the testing part of things. So in general, we believe there are several enhancements to tROAS needed. So one is the data input. So actually you measure, you define what success is, and you push these KPIs back into the system so that you can inform the AI with the right information so that it actually works for you and not somebody else. Then we have a bunch of other enhancements. I don't want to go into the details for the sake of time right now. So how do you get your own KPIs into tROAS? So essentially that's a two-step process. We ingest data in real time through the tracking tag. So what we have available is what products were contained in the shopping basket, what the margins of these products roughly are, what return rate we saw in the past, and we also can get an indication whether the one who has bought is a new customer or an existing customer. At least we can estimate this. Then we compute, based on this information, an estimated transaction value. In this case, these $200 here, which we ingest through the tracking tag into the Google Ads platform. So at some point, we get better information. So we would know, no, this was not a new customer. It was someone who just bought with a different email address. We would know whether products were returned or not returned. We would know what the actual costs were, and so on. Maybe my attribution system measures incrementality factors. So in this case here, it was a basket abandoner, so minus 80%. We would ingest then this value through post-processing and would overwrite the 200 we had defined. So where it definitely helps is in order to measure performance and see the result, an accurate result in the interface. Where it also helps is informing the tROAS bidding where we see value. So it means when we generate higher margins with a lot of new customers, the KPIs will look better. So Google will favor these segments and push harder. Where we feel it's likely just not reacting, but there's also no harm, is on the audience side. We doubt that if you reduce the value of basket abandoners by 80%, that the system will stop bidding as it did before. So we believe this is rather hard-coded and based on buying propensity, but doesn't really react to the changes. But for the sake of measurability, comparability, that's still crucial. So we tested smart bidding against the traditional approach in the way Google recommended us to test it, which was drafts and experiments combined with DDA. The problem here is generally that there are always overlapping customer journeys. So essentially, we might have one click in the traditional approach, then another click tROAS, and it's going back and forth. And as these impressions are randomized and everything is happening in the same geolocations, it's in the end a matter of how you attribute sales which happen and had several touch points, the tROAS and traditional approach. Long story short, we saw that when we switched off the tROAS bidding, that our clicks increased by 101%. So this is as expected, and it proves that the randomization worked as it's supposed to work. So all very good. However, wait a second. However, we saw that at the same time our conversions went up by 119%. And this is weird because we would have expected also getting 100% more conversions. But apparently the attribution did not work well, and there were not so many clicks needed to make the conversion, which is our initial claim. So if we get 100% more clicks after pausing the test, but 120% more conversions, we can simply say it's not working, it's not doing its job properly, and this is why we wouldn't recommend using it. There is a second aspect to it, this is if you use complex campaign structures. For example, what we mentioned, new customer campaign, existing customer campaign, then there are flaws in the system, and it also doesn't do its job properly. So the impressions are randomized. So let's say we get one impression, and then we would say minus 90% bid modifier. It's an existing customer. We don't want this customer in the new customer campaign. As our bid is so low, Google would say, no, you're not eligible for the auction, so we just don't give you the impression. So instead of routing that impression to the existing customer campaign, it just goes away and we don't execute on it. And as a result, we saw 143 increase in clicks for the existing customer campaign, which is clearly distorted, and it's another reason if you use a somewhat more complex structure, you want to test it against tROAS, it's likely that this is being distorted in the end. So there's a way around to get really reliable and clean results, which is a geo experiment. So essentially what you do, you pick correlated regions, and you let tROAS run in one region and the traditional approach in the other region, and then you just flip things around. In the end, you wait, have a cool down time in order to see whether there are late conversions coming in, and then you evaluate your test. The big advantage is simply that we do not have these overlaying customer journeys as we target different geo regions. And in this case, you also don't have a different variable which might distort the results, which is attribution. So to summarize the section here, it's doable, possible to ingest data into tROAS, what is something which is great. Draft and experiment is very new. It's not working as it's supposed to work, so we wouldn't recommend using it at this point of time. But a geo approach, which also is oftentimes recommended by Google, is working robustly. Good. My last statement here is we need to ask ourselves what our role will be in a future which is AI-driven. And we know that bidding hasn't been a real differentiator for some time already. So whether you use bidding system 1, 2, or 3, you might have seen differences of maybe 5% plus minus, if at all. And this is why, in the end, the selection of tool providers has become some comparison of feature lists instead of just comparing performance. So we already come from a world where bidding was commoditized, and this is just the next step. So in these times, it's and in order to thrive in times of AI, it's essential that you own and master the measurement side of things. First of all, AI is just as good as the numbers you ingest into the system. You need to inform the system with the right KPIs, and garbage in, garbage out. If what you funnel in is not correct, then the system will make wrong decisions in the end. There's a second aspect to it, which is a conflict of interest, of course. you have different goals than someone who is publisher. And I'm not just referring to Google. It's any publisher. It's Amazon, it's Facebook. Everyone will try to show a great return, which might be true or it might not be, but it's important that this is being measured properly. And I would recommend to really invest time and resources to get the measurement right. Once you have the right numbers and you feel confident you can rely on them, make them available. It doesn't help in biddable media if you have some ex post analysis. You need to inform systems on a granular level. And last but not least, it's not about running a little bit faster than your competition. We will eventually, at some point, all use the same tools. So we will all run equally fast. However, we need to make sure that we get the direction better than our competitors. And revenue is a very poor KPI if you are in retail. It's just not about revenue. It's about margins you make not only today but over time. And what we see today is a great misalignment between the overall business strategy from retailers versus how marketing campaigns are actually executed. And if you measure things in the best possible way, you ingest your numbers into biddable media systems and you aim for the right targets, I believe there's a lot of space for differentiation. That's it so far. Thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to getting questions in the remaining 9 minutes we have left.
Thank you, Andy. That was a tremendous amount of information, and as I expected, you've generated a lot of questions among our attendees with all of your in-depth expertise about these bidding technologies. So we do have a few minutes. We're running a little behind, but let's get right to them then. Andy, I'm going to put this first question up on the slide area, and I'm going to read it to you, and then you can think about your answer. So using smart campaigns, how do you determine which are targeting new customers versus existing customers? That may help the marketers understand how much to bid, right? Whether they're new or already have some value as customers. So what do you think about that question?
So first of all, we are not running smart campaigns, but what you can always do, you can see where you can check the orders you get. So you can compare them with your CRM system, and you would then see how many new customers and how many existing customers you would get. You can also do it via, if you want to do it in a solid way, you implement it through the tracking. So you can, when the pixel fires in this at this point of time, you can then hand over a parameter and flag new customers versus existing customers. It's important that the information is available at the point of time when the pixel fires, and this is something you need to solve and make this data available in a timely manner.
All right, great. Let's keep moving then. Next question. Do you know if all of the automated bidding strategies ignore your audience exclusions, such as TCPA, max clicks, etc.?
TCPA, as far as I know, also doesn't allow for audience exclusions. I'm not familiar with max clicks, so I can't say that. Yeah.
All right, that was easy. This is kind of two questions in one, so we'll take them one at a time. Okay, do you still recommend manual bidding for web stores that only have 500 to 1,000 products, or do you recommend smart bidding or any other method? So let's start with that.
I think it's hard to just directly respond to that question and make my answer helpful. I would first of all recommend to test things. in the end, we shouldn't care about what bidding solution we are using. In the end, we care about the results we are getting out of this. And this depends a lot on your target, for example. If it's just revenue, I would say it's unlikely that someone will get much better results out of this. If the volume might be too low, there's not enough data available, it could be, so I would recommend to test it. You need to be really, really good in order to beat tROAS on pure revenue maximization. But coming back to the point, this is not necessarily what you should do.
Okay, so second part there, and see if this will make more sense for you. When doing manual bidding, which parameters do you recommend to follow? Impression, share combined with profits or losses? Or please shed more light on how to measure each campaign as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, so I think the general concept is very clear. In the end, it's your challenge as marketers to measure success, and it's about what is the value contribution of any order you generate to your business. And I intentionally phrased that broadly because this covers many things. So, I mean, yes, tracking revenue is nice, but you'd like to know what was the profit margin you got from this. You also want to know, is there more value than just selling the to this customer once? Is there whatever? Do you benefit from referrals? Are there? So you just need to estimate what the overall value is. The same holds true with audiences. If you know that someone who has spent 5 hours on your website and was then retargeted would have bought anyway, the value to your business of a specific ad is not that great. But the trick, or what you need to aim for, is always think about what true value did your campaigns generate, and try to make these figures available on the most granular level. In the end, bidding systems are dumb. They don't know what they are doing. They see numbers coming in and they just react to them. So I think that's the biggest gap currently in the market, that we take what we see for granted and then optimize for efficiency. So to make it very explicit, I would definitely recommend to track your order margin. I would definitely recommend to track whether an order was from an existing or a new customer, and you should ideally have some expected return rates in mind. If you sell shoes in Germany, your return rate will be 80%. If you sell laptops, the return rate will be 2%. You have to kind of reflect this in the bidding.
All right, Andreas, let's try and get to one more, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. What did you perceive to be the downside in using drafts and experiments?
This is a very simple question. It doesn't work. So the results are not reliable because we saw when tROAS was paused that we got more, we doubled the clicks, so randomization worked well, but as they're overlapping customer journeys and Google is generating many, many, many more clicks, which are not necessarily needed, there was a much higher performance increase than just 100%, which would have correlated with the clicks. The same happened with more complex campaign structures. 140% more conversions after pausing tROAS. So to simplify it, it has proven to not give us accurate results.
All right. Well, I'm glad that was a simple answer. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. So, audience, I know we had a lot more questions out there. I want to let you all know that we are passing all the questions along to our friends at Crealytics, and you will get follow-up responses. So if we ran out of time today, don't worry about that. You're going to hear from Andreas and his team there at Crealytics. I want to give a big thank you to Andreas for a very informative and timely presentation. And again, thank you, audience, for the great questions and the ones we were able to get to today. I do want to give a special thank you to Crealytics for sponsoring our webinar today. And you can visit the website and check out the technology there yourself at www.crealytics.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time, right here at Digital Marketing Depot.